The screech of tires against wet asphalt pierced the quiet evening air as Marcus Chen watched in horror from his apartment window. A silver Honda Civic had lost control on the curve of Maple Street, spinning twice before slamming sideways into the concrete barrier that separated the road from Miller's Creek. Steam hissed from the crumpled engine as the car settled at an unnatural angle, its front end submerged in the shallow water. Marcus didn't think. He bolted from his third-floor apartment, taking the stairs 3 at a time, his bare feet slapping against the cold concrete. The autumn rain had turned the evening into a treacherous maze of slick surfaces and poor visibility, but none of that mattered as he splashed into the creek toward the smoking vehicle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Through the spider-webbed windshield, he could see a figure, slumped forward, dark hair obscuring their face. The driver's side door was completely crushed against the barrier, but the passenger side remained accessible. Marcus waded deeper into the creek, the icy water reaching his waist as he fought against the current to reach the car. "Can you hear me?" he shouted, pounding on the passenger window. No response. The smell of gasoline mixed with creek water filled his nostrils, and he could see a thin rainbow sheen spreading across the water's surface. Time was running out. Using a jagged piece of concrete from the broken barrier, Marcus shattered the passenger window, ignoring the glass that bit into his knuckles. He reached across the unconscious woman, unbuckling her seatbelt and checking for a pulse. Strong but rapid. Blood trickled from a cut above her eyebrow, but she was breathing. The car groaned ominously as the current pushed against it, threatening to drag it deeper into the creek. Marcus managed to lift the woman from her seat, her business attire soaked and heavy with muddy water. She was petite but felt like dead weight in his arms as he struggled back toward the creek bank, each step a battle against the rushing water and his own exhaustion. Just as he reached dry ground, laying her gently on the grass beside the road, the woman's eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze was unfocused at first, but gradually sharpened to take in Marcus's concerned face hovering above her. She had striking green eyes that seemed to assess everything around her, even in her disoriented state. "You're safe now," Marcus said softly, his own voice shaking from adrenaline and cold. "Don't try to move. I'm calling for help." The woman tried to speak but only managed a weak cough, creek water trickling from the corner of her mouth. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew louder as someone else must have called emergency services. Marcus shrugged out of his soaked jacket and draped it over her shivering form, staying close until the paramedics arrived and took over. As the ambulance disappeared into the night, its red lights reflecting off the wet pavement, Marcus finally allowed himself to acknowledge the cold seeping into his bones. He walked slowly back to his apartment, leaving wet footprints in the hallway, unaware that this moment of instinctive heroism would soon collide with his carefully constructed life in ways he could never imagine. Marcus Chen had learned to expect rejection. At 42, he had perfected the art of disappointment management, filing away each "we regret to inform you" email with the same methodical precision he once used to debug software code. The transition from senior developer at a Fortune 500 company to unemployed single father had been swift and brutal, courtesy of a merger that eliminated his entire division overnight. Now, 18 months later, Marcus sat in the cramped back office of Danny's Electronics, a family-owned repair shop wedged between a laundromat and a taco truck in the less fashionable part of downtown Phoenix. The work was honest but monotonous, replacing cracked phone screens, cleaning viruses from elderly customers' laptops, explaining why their 10-year-old printer couldn't connect to their new smart TV. It paid just enough to cover rent on their modest 2-bedroom apartment and keep food on the table, but barely more. The real weight on Marcus's shoulders wasn't his own diminished career prospects. It was Emma, his 7-year-old daughter, who approached each day with the kind of determined optimism that broke his heart and kept him going in equal measure. Emma had been born with a rare autoimmune condition that required constant monitoring, expensive medications, and quarterly visits to specialists in Los Angeles, a 3-hour drive. That ate into both their finances and what little time off Marcus could arrange. His ex-wife Jennifer had moved to Seattle 2 years ago, ostensibly for a job opportunity, but Marcus knew the truth. She couldn't handle watching Emma struggle with daily injections, dietary restrictions, and the unpredictable flare-ups that sometimes landed them in the emergency room. Jennifer sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts, called every few weeks, and contributed a modest amount to Emma's medical expenses. But the day-to-day reality of raising a chronically ill child had proven too much for her. Marcus didn't blame her, not anymore. Some people were built for this kind of marathon, and others weren't. He had discovered reserves of patience and strength he never knew existed, learned to read the subtle signs that preceded Emma's bad days, mastered the art of making rice cakes and steamed vegetables seem like treats when her medication affected her appetite. The apartment they shared was small but filled with Emma's artwork, her completed puzzle collections, and the specialized medical equipment that had become as familiar as furniture. A nebulizer sat next to her bed, its quiet hum a nightly soundtrack. The refrigerator hummed with temperature-sensitive medications, and Marcus had become expert at rotating stock and managing expiration dates like a pharmacist. Each morning, Marcus would help Emma with her injection, a process they had turned into a game involving her stuffed elephant, Dr. Peanuts, who also needed his special medicine at the same time. Emma would count to 3 in various languages. She was learning from library books, and Marcus would administer the shot during her enthusiastic Tress, or Sam. Her resilience amazed him daily. She rarely complained, even when the injections left her arm sore or when fatigue forced her to miss playground time with friends. The medical bills were a constant shadow. Even with insurance, the copays and uncovered treatments mounted steadily. Marcus had long since depleted his savings, sold his car for an older but reliable Honda, and moved them from their suburban house to the apartment. He worked overtime whenever Danny would allow it, and spent his evenings freelancing building websites for local businesses, troubleshooting network issues for the taco truck owner's brother, anything that might add a few $100s to their monthly income. The stack of rejection letters from tech companies had grown thick enough to use as a makeshift laptop stand. Each one delivered the same message in slightly different corporate language. His skills were outdated. The gap in his resume raised concerns. They had decided to go with a candidate who was a better fit for their current needs. The truth was simpler and more brutal at 42, with a resume gap and caregiving responsibilities that limited his availability for the long hours and travel that many positions required. He had become invisible in a field that worshipped youth and total dedication. Marcus had applied to Pinnacle Dynamics 3 times over the past year. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The company was one of Phoenix's rising stars in the tech sector, known for innovative software solutions and, more importantly for Marcus, their reputation for excellent employee benefits, including comprehensive medical coverage. Each application had been carefully tailored, highlighting his experience with systems they used, emphasizing his problem-solving abilities and dedication to quality work. The first rejection had come within a week, a brief, professional email thanking him for his interest. The second, 6 months later, had taken longer, giving him hope that perhaps he was being seriously considered before the familiar disappointment arrived. The third rejection, just last month, had been the most crushing because he knew it represented his best chance at providing Emma with the medical security she needed. What Marcus didn't know was that his applications never made it past the initial screening process. Rebecca Martinez, Pinnacle Dynamics HR Director, had developed her own system for managing the overwhelming volume of applications the company received. Candidates over 40 were automatically flagged for additional scrutiny, and those with employment gaps were typically rejected unless they had extraordinary circumstances or connections within the company. Rebecca was 34, ambitious, and proud of her efficiency in managing Pinnacle's hiring process. She had streamlined everything, creating algorithms and filters that helped her process hundreds of applications weekly. The company's rapid growth meant constant hiring, and she had little time for second-guessing her decisions. Marcus Chen's applications, like many others, had been declined within minutes of submission, his age and resume gap triggering her automated rejection criteria. At Pinnacle Dynamics, Rebecca Martinez commanded respect and wielded considerable influence. She had built the company's human resources department from the ground up, establishing policies and procedures that supported their aggressive expansion. Her office on the 10th floor offered sweeping views of downtown Phoenix, and her calendar was packed with strategic meetings, executive briefings, and interviews with high-level candidates. Rebecca lived in a converted loft in the Arts District, drove a leased BMW, and maintained a social calendar that revolved around professional networking events and fitness classes. At 34, she had achieved the career success she had dreamed of since business school, but increasingly found herself wondering why the achievements felt hollow. Her last relationship had ended 8 months ago when her partner complained that she was married to her job, and she was beginning to suspect he hadn't been entirely wrong. The evening of the accident, Rebecca had been working late again, reviewing candidate profiles for a senior engineering position that needed to be filled urgently. She prided herself on her attention to detail and her ability to identify the perfect fit for each role, though her definition of perfect had become increasingly narrow over the years. Experience with the latest technologies, degree from a recognized program, employment history with reputable companies, age young enough to adapt to Pinnacle's fast-paced culture. She had been driving home through an unfamiliar neighborhood, taking the shortcut her GPS had suggested to avoid traffic on the main highway, when the combination of rain, fatigue, and an oil slick from a recent road repair project sent her car spinning out of control. The last thing she remembered was the sickening sensation of weightlessness before the impact, followed by the taste of blood and muddy water. Waking up on the grass beside Miller's Creek, with a stranger's jacket draped over her and paramedics checking her vital signs, Rebecca experienced a moment of complete disorientation. The face that had hovered above her in those first conscious moments, kind eyes, concerned expression, hair still dripping with creek water, remained vivid, even as the paramedics bundled her into the ambulance for transport to Phoenix General Hospital. The doctors kept her overnight for observation due to her concussion, and it wasn't until the next morning, when a police officer came to take her statement, that Rebecca learned about her mysterious rescuer. The officer's report was sparse. Unidentified male, approximately 40 years old, had pulled her from the vehicle before emergency services arrived. No contact information, no name, no way to thank him properly. For someone accustomed to having all the information she needed at her fingertips, the mystery nagged at Rebecca in ways she couldn't explain. She found herself replaying those few moments of consciousness beside the creek, trying to remember details about the man who had risked his own safety to save her. His voice had been calm and reassuring, his hands gentle but strong as he'd covered her with his jacket. In a life filled with networking contacts and professional relationships, Rebecca realized she had been saved by a complete stranger who expected nothing in return. 3 days after the accident, Rebecca returned to work with a small bandage above her left eyebrow and a determination to find her rescuer that surprised her with its intensity. She hired a private investigator, thinking it would be simple enough to track down someone who lived in the Maple Street area, but the investigation yielded nothing useful. None of the apartment building residents remembered seeing anyone matching the description, and no one had come forward despite a small item in the local newspaper's community section asking for information. The need to find and thank this man became more than just good manners for Rebecca. It felt like unfinished business that she couldn't file away and forget. She began driving through the neighborhood during her lunch breaks, hoping to spot someone who looked familiar, visiting local businesses to ask if anyone knew of a good Samaritan who lived in the area. Her assistant thought she was being excessive, but Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that this stranger had given her something more than just physical rescue from the creek. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his routine of dropping Emma off at school, working at Danny's Electronics, picking Emma up from her after-school program, helping with homework, preparing dinner, managing her evening medication, and then spending hours on freelance projects after she went to sleep. The incident at Miller's Creek had faded into just another memory, notable only for the jacket he'd lost and the cold he'd caught from spending time in wet clothes. Emma was having a good week. Her energy levels were stable, her appetite was decent, and she was excited about a school project on community helpers that let her interview Danny about running a small business. Marcus cherished these periods when her condition remained quiet, allowing them both to pretend that their life was as normal as any other single father and daughters. The normalcy was precious but fragile. Marcus knew from experience that Emma's health could change without warning, that a simple cold could trigger complications requiring hospitalization, that the medications keeping her stable were a constant balancing act between effectiveness and side effects. The financial pressure never let up. Each prescription renewal, each doctor's visit, each lab test added to their mounting expenses. He had started exploring other options for Emma's care, researching clinical trials and experimental treatments that might be covered by different insurance programs. The research was time-consuming and often discouraging, but Marcus approached it with the same methodical persistence he brought to debugging complex code problems. Every potential solution required investigation. Every lead needed to be followed, until it reached either success or a dead end. The freelance work was beginning to pick up slightly. Word-of-mouth referrals had brought him a few small projects that paid better than his usual clients: a restaurant chain needing help with their point-of-sale system, a non-profit organization requiring database management, a startup looking for someone to clean up their existing code before launching their beta version. Each project represented not just immediate income, but the possibility of building relationships that might lead to larger opportunities. Marcus had also begun teaching himself newer programming languages and frameworks during his limited free time, using online courses and library books to update his skills. He understood that his technical knowledge had gaps that needed filling if he wanted to compete for better positions, but finding time for learning between work, parenting, and freelancing was an ongoing challenge. Some nights, after Emma was asleep and his freelance work was done, he would spend an hour working through tutorials, his eyes burning from staring at screens all day. The rejection from Pinnacle Dynamics still stung, partly because he knew he could do the work they needed, and partly because their employee benefits package would have solved so many of Emma's medical concerns. Marcus had researched the company thoroughly before applying, reading about their innovative projects and positive workplace culture. Their health insurance covered experimental treatments, had no lifetime caps on benefits, and included coverage for the Los Angeles specialists Emma saw quarterly. What made the rejection harder to accept was that Marcus knew his experience was exactly what companies like Pinnacle needed: someone who had worked on enterprise-level systems, who understood the complexities of scaling software solutions, who could troubleshoot problems that less experienced developers might not even recognize. His age and caregiving responsibilities weren't deficits in his ability to do the work. They were proof of his reliability and commitment. But the job market seemed to operate on assumptions that didn't account for people like Marcus. The presumption that gaps in employment meant lack of motivation rather than life circumstances, that older workers were less adaptable rather than more experienced, that parents couldn't be as dedicated as their childless colleagues. Each rejection reinforced these biases, making it harder for Marcus to maintain confidence in his professional worth. Still, he persisted. Every evening, after Emma's bedtime routine was complete, Marcus would spend time updating his portfolio, applying to new positions, and researching companies that might value his combination of technical skills and life experience. He had learned to customize each application carefully, highlighting different aspects of his background depending on what each employer seemed to prioritize. The work at Danny's Electronics provided stability and a sense of purpose, even if it didn't utilize his full skill set. Danny Restrepo was a good boss who understood Marcus's family obligations and allowed flexible scheduling when Emma needed medical appointments. The customers were generally patient and appreciative, and Marcus found satisfaction in solving their technical problems, even when those problems were as simple as teaching someone how to back up their photos or explaining why their Wi-Fi wasn't working. Some of the regular customers had become almost like friends, checking on Emma when they came in and asking about her school projects or how she was feeling. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who brought in her tablet whenever it displayed an unfamiliar message, always asked to see Emma's latest artwork and had become an unofficial grandmother figure. Carlos from the taco truck next door would sometimes bring lunch for Marcus and Emma when she spent after-school hours at the shop, and his kids had become Emma's friends despite the language barrier. These small community connections provided a support network that Marcus hadn't expected but had learned to value. In their old suburban life, neighbors had been polite but distant, and most of Emma's friendships had been structured around playdates and organized activities. Here, in their more modest circumstances, they had found a different kind of community, people who looked out for each other not because of social obligations, but because of shared humanity. Emma thrived in this environment in ways that surprised Marcus. She loved helping customers at the electronics shop, explaining to other children how to use educational apps or showing elderly customers pictures of her school projects. Her condition made her empathetic to others' struggles, and she had developed an intuitive ability to make people feel comfortable and valued. Marcus often marveled at how his daughter had inherited none of his tendency toward introversion, instead possessing a natural warmth that drew people to her. The medical challenges remained constant but manageable. Emma's quarterly trips to Los Angeles had become routine adventures that they both looked forward to, despite the medical necessity. They would drive down early, stay in a budget motel with a pool, visit the specialist, and then spend the afternoon at a museum or the beach before driving home. Emma had memorized the route and could navigate Marcus through LA traffic better than his GPS, calling out landmarks and favorite stops along the way. Dr. Sarah Kim, Emma's specialist, had become more than just a medical provider. She was a source of hope and practical guidance who understood the financial pressures facing families like theirs. She often adjusted treatment protocols to use more affordable medications when possible, provided samples to bridge gaps between insurance approvals, and had connected them with other families dealing with similar conditions. These relationships reminded Marcus that they weren't alone in their struggles, even when it felt that way during Emma's difficult days. The financial strain was relentless but not insurmountable. Marcus had learned to be creative with their budget, finding ways to make their limited resources stretch to cover both necessities and small pleasures that kept Emma's childhood from feeling defined entirely by medical concerns. Library visits replaced trips to bookstores, free community events substituted for expensive entertainment, and cooking at home became an opportunity for Emma to learn about nutrition while helping plan meals that worked with her dietary restrictions. Marcus had also discovered that his technical skills were valuable in unexpected ways within their community. He helped the local elementary school upgrade their computer lab, assisted the community center with their Wi-Fi problems, and provided tech support for several small businesses in exchange for services rather than cash. These bartering arrangements helped stretch their budget while building relationships that enriched both his and Emma's lives. The apartment that had initially felt like a step down from their previous house had become home in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. Emma had decorated her room with artwork from school and photos from their LA trips, creating a space that reflected her personality and interests. The kitchen was small but functional, and they had established routines around meal preparation and homework that made the space feel comfortable and organized. The building's other tenants included several families with children, giving Emma playmates who lived close enough for impromptu visits. As autumn deepened into winter, Marcus began preparing for Emma's annual insurance review, a process that required extensive documentation of her medical needs and often resulted in changes to coverage that affected their treatment options. These reviews were stressful for both of them, as insurance companies regularly questioned the necessity of medications that Emma had been taking successfully for years, or required prior authorization for procedures that her doctors considered routine. The paperwork involved in managing Emma's care had become a part-time job in itself. Marcus maintained detailed records of every prescription, every doctor's visit, every lab result, and every insurance claim. He had learned to navigate the complex appeals process when claims were denied, to advocate effectively for coverage of necessary treatments, and to research alternative options when their primary insurance wouldn't approve recommended therapies. Despite these challenges, Marcus felt proud of the life he and Emma had built together. They had created stability and happiness within constraints that might have overwhelmed them, and Emma was thriving academically and socially despite her medical challenges. Her teachers consistently praised her kindness toward classmates, her creative problem-solving abilities, and her mature understanding of complex topics. She was exactly the kind of person Marcus hoped she would become: resilient, compassionate, curious, and determined. The mystery of the woman he had pulled from Miller's Creek occasionally crossed Marcus's mind, usually when he passed the accident site on his way to work. He wondered if she had recovered fully from her injuries, whether the concussion had caused any lasting problems, if she had family who could help during her recovery. The incident had been frightening but brief, and Marcus had no expectation of ever seeing her again or learning what had happened to her afterward. In the immediate aftermath of the rescue, Marcus had been too focused on getting home, changing into dry clothes, and making sure Emma didn't worry about why he was soaking wet and shivering. By the next morning, the incident had taken its place among the ordinary emergencies and minor crises that punctuated their routine, important in the moment, but quickly superseded by the ongoing demands of work and parenting. What Marcus couldn't know was that Rebecca Martinez was still searching for him, driven by a need to express gratitude that had evolved into something deeper and more complicated. Her near-death experience had triggered a reevaluation of her priorities and relationships that she was still processing, and finding her rescuer had become symbolic of her desire to connect with something more meaningful than professional achievement. The accident had also made Rebecca more aware of her own mortality and vulnerability in ways that her fast-paced, success-oriented lifestyle had previously allowed her to ignore. She had begun questioning whether the long hours and intense focus that had built her career were sustainable or even worthwhile if they left no room for the kind of human connection she had experienced in those few moments beside Miller's Creek. As winter approached, both Marcus and Rebecca continued their separate routines, unaware that their lives had already begun to intersect in ways that would soon become impossible to ignore. Marcus focused on Emma's needs and his determination to provide her with the best possible care, while Rebecca grappled with questions about purpose and fulfillment that her professional success had raised rather than answered. The stage was set for a collision between two worlds, one defined by sacrifice and unconditional love, the other by ambition and controlled efficiency. Neither Marcus nor Rebecca could have predicted how profoundly their brief encounter beside a creek would eventually reshape both their understanding of what truly mattered and their vision of what their futures might hold. In the comfortable routine of their daily lives, both were about to discover that sometimes the most significant changes begin with the smallest acts of human kindness, and that the connections we make in moments of crisis can illuminate truths about ourselves that we never knew we were seeking. Rebecca's determination to find her rescuer intensified as the weeks passed. The private investigator she had hired delivered his final report with disappointing results: no concrete leads, no witnesses who could provide useful information, and no one in the Maple Street neighborhood who matched the description of the man who had pulled her from the creek. The investigation had cost her $3,000 and yielded nothing more than a confirmation that her mysterious hero seemed to have vanished without a trace. Unable to let the matter rest, Rebecca decided to take a more direct approach. She began visiting businesses in the area during her lunch breaks, showing a sketch artist's rendering based on her fragmented memories to shop owners, restaurant managers, and anyone who might recognize the face. The drawing wasn't particularly detailed. She had only seen him clearly for a few moments in the darkness and rain, but it captured the general features she remembered: kind eyes, dark hair, a face that looked weathered by experience but not hardened by it. Most people she approached were polite but unhelpful. They would study the sketch, shake their heads apologetically, and wish her luck in her search. A few offered suggestions about posting flyers or contacting local news stations, but Rebecca hesitated to make her search that public. Her position at Pinnacle Dynamics made her cautious about media attention, and she wasn't sure she was ready to explain why finding this stranger mattered so much to her. The accident had left Rebecca with more than just physical injuries. Her doctor had warned that concussions could have lingering effects: headaches, difficulty concentrating, mood changes, but Rebecca was experiencing something she hadn't expected: a profound shift in how she viewed her daily priorities. The long hours at the office that had once energized her now felt hollow and repetitive. The networking events and professional development seminars that had filled her evenings seemed less important than they once had. At Pinnacle Dynamics, Rebecca continued to excel at her job, but she found herself questioning decisions that had previously felt automatic. When reviewing resumes for a new engineering position, she caught herself pausing over applications from older candidates, wondering about the stories behind their career gaps instead of immediately filtering them out. The efficiency that had made her successful suddenly felt cold and impersonal. Her assistant, Maria Santos, noticed the change but attributed it to lingering effects from the concussion. Rebecca had always been demanding but fair, expecting excellence from her team, while maintaining professional boundaries. Now she seemed distracted, more likely to ask about employees' personal lives, more willing to accommodate scheduling requests that she might have previously denied. The shift was subtle but meaningful. When Tom Bradley, one of her recruiting specialists, requested time off to attend his daughter's school play, Rebecca not only approved the request but suggested he leave early to avoid traffic. When Jennifer Walsh, her benefits coordinator, mentioned struggling with childcare arrangements during a family emergency, Rebecca authorized overtime for a temporary assistant without requiring the usual documentation and approval process. These small acts of flexibility felt natural to Rebecca, but they represented a significant departure from her previous management style. She had built her reputation on maintaining standards and enforcing policies consistently, believing that any deviation would undermine her authority and the department's effectiveness. Now she was discovering that compassion and efficiency didn't have to be mutually exclusive. Meanwhile, Marcus Chen continued his routine at Danny's Electronics, unaware that the woman he had rescued was systematically searching for him just a few miles away. The winter months brought their own challenges. Emma's condition was often affected by weather changes, requiring adjustments to her medication and more frequent monitoring of her symptoms. The cold, dry air of the desert winter could trigger respiratory issues that complicated her autoimmune condition, making their daily management even more complex. Emma had developed a philosophical approach to her health challenges that both amazed and concerned Marcus. At 7 years old, she could explain her condition to curious classmates with medical accuracy, demonstrate proper injection techniques to her stuffed animals, and adjust her activity level based on how she was feeling without being prompted. Her maturity was remarkable, but Marcus sometimes worried that she was missing out on the carefree nature that should define childhood. The after-school program at Emma's elementary school had become a crucial support system for their family. Mrs. Rodriguez, who supervised the program, had learned to recognize the early signs of Emma's flare-ups and knew how to contact Marcus immediately if intervention was needed. Emma's classmates had also adapted to her needs, including her medication schedule in their playtime and understanding when she needed to rest instead of running around the playground. Marcus's freelance work had gradually expanded beyond simple website maintenance and troubleshooting. A local nonprofit organization had hired him to develop a database system for tracking donations and volunteer hours, and his success with that project had led to referrals for similar work. The pay was better than his typical clients, and the projects were complex enough to challenge his technical skills in ways that he had missed since leaving his corporate position. Working on these larger projects reminded Marcus of his capabilities and rekindled his confidence in his professional value. He began updating his portfolio with screenshots and descriptions of his recent work, documenting the problems he had solved and the technologies he had mastered. The portfolio served a practical purpose for attracting new clients, but it also helped Marcus maintain his sense of identity as a skilled professional rather than just someone who fixed broken phones. For a living, Danny Restrepo had noticed Marcus's growing reputation in the local business community and had begun referring customers who needed more sophisticated technical help than basic repairs. These referrals represented a new revenue stream for the father shop and allowed Marcus to work on more interesting problems while maintaining his steady employment. Danny appreciated having someone with Marcus's background available for complex issues, and Marcus valued the flexibility to pursue freelance opportunities without jeopardizing his primary income. The relationship between Marcus and Danny had evolved beyond employer and employee into something closer to friendship. Danny understood the pressures of running a small business while balancing family responsibilities, and he respected Marcus's dedication to Emma's care. When Emma spent after-school hours at the shop, Danny would engage her in conversations about business operations, teaching her basic math through cash register transactions and explaining how customer service created loyal relationships. Emma had become something of a mascot for the electronics shop. Regular customers would ask about her school projects and health status, and some would bring small gifts or treats when they came in for repairs. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman with the temperamental tablet, had appointed herself Emma's honorary grandmother, bringing homemade cookies and helping with homework when Emma was at the shop. These relationships provided Emma with an extended support network that Marcus appreciated, but couldn't have planned or arranged. The community around Danny's electronics had embraced Marcus and Emma in ways that their previous suburban neighborhood never had. The diversity of the area meant that many families were dealing with their own challenges and understood the importance of mutual support. Language barriers were overcome through kindness and patience. Economic differences were set aside in favor of shared humanity, and the small businesses supported each other through informal networks of cooperation and referral. Carlos from the taco truck had become particularly close to Emma, teaching her Spanish phrases and involving her in conversations with his own children when they visited the truck after school. His wife Rosa, who helped run the business, had experience with childhood health issues and often provided Marcus with practical advice about managing medications, dealing with insurance companies, and maintaining normal childhood experiences. Despite medical constraints, These friendships had developed organically through daily interactions and shared experiences. Marcus hadn't sought out a support network, but he had found himself part of a community that understood struggle and resilience. The relationships weren't based on professional networking or social status, but on genuine care and mutual assistance. As winter progressed toward spring, Marcus began preparing for Emma's annual insurance review and benefit renewal process. This administrative marathon required gathering medical records, completing extensive paperwork, and justifying the necessity of treatments that had kept Emma stable for years. Insurance companies regularly challenged the cost and frequency of her medications, requiring letters from specialists and detailed documentation of her medical history. The process was particularly stressful because any changes to their coverage could disrupt Emma's treatment plan and potentially affect her health outcomes. Marcus had learned to start the paperwork early, maintain duplicate copies of all documents, and prepare appeals before denials were even issued. The bureaucracy was maddening, but he had developed systems for managing it efficiently. Dr. Kim's office in Los Angeles had become experts at navigating insurance requirements for families like Marcus and Emma. The staff knew which forms were needed for different insurance companies, how to phrase medical justifications to maximize approval chances, and when to escalate denials to higher levels of review. Their assistance was invaluable, but Marcus understood that many families dealing with similar conditions didn't have access to such knowledgeable advocates. Emma's quarterly appointment in Los Angeles was approaching, and Marcus had already scheduled time off from both the electronic shop and his freelance projects. These trips required careful planning, arranging coverage at work, packing Emma's medications with temperature controls, booking the budget motel that had become their regular stop, and preparing entertainment for the long drive and inevitable waiting room delays. Despite the medical necessity, Emma looked forward to these Los Angeles adventures. She had memorized the route and created a travel journal where she documented interesting sights, new foods they tried, and activities they enjoyed during their overnight stays. The trips had become bonding experiences that strengthened their relationship and provided Emma with expanded horizons beyond their daily routine in Phoenix. Rebecca's search for her rescuer had taken on a rhythm of its own. Every Tuesday and Thursday during her lunch break, she would drive through different neighborhoods near Miller's Creek, stopping at businesses she hadn't yet visited and showing the sketch to employees and customers. She had covered most of the obvious locations, gas stations, grocery stores, restaurants, and was beginning to expand her search to less likely places. Her persistence was noticed by some of the business owners she visited repeatedly. The manager of a small auto repair shop near the creek had begun expecting her weekly visits and would have his staff ready to look at the sketch when she arrived. A barista at a coffee shop had posted the drawing on their community bulletin board, hoping someone might recognize the man and provide information. These small acts of cooperation encouraged Rebecca to continue her search, even when logical thinking suggested she should give up. The sketch had become worn from being shown to so many people, and Rebecca had made multiple copies to distribute to willing business owners. She had also created a small reward poster offering a modest payment for information, leading to contact with the man who had rescued her from the car accident on November 15th. The posters went up in laundromats, community centers, and grocery store bulletin boards throughout the area. Rebecca's colleagues at Pinnacle Dynamics were aware that she was searching for someone but didn't understand the intensity of her commitment to finding him. Her assistant Maria had offered to help coordinate the search more systematically, suggesting they hire additional investigators or expand the poster campaign, but Rebecca preferred to handle the search personally. She couldn't explain why, but meeting her rescuer face-to-face felt like something she needed to do herself. The accident had triggered questions about Rebecca's life choices that extended beyond her search for the mysterious stranger. She had begun reevaluating her relationships, her career goals, and her definition of success in ways that surprised her. The achievement-oriented mindset that had driven her professional advancement suddenly seemed incomplete, lacking the human connections that gave meaning to accomplishment. Rebecca's social life had been built around professional networking and career advancement for so long that she had forgotten how to form relationships based on personal compatibility rather than strategic value. Her calendar was full of industry, events, conference calls, and business dinners, but empty of the kind of personal connections that provided emotional support and genuine friendship. The realization was unsettling but also liberating. Rebecca began declining some professional obligations that didn't align with her evolving priorities, creating space in her schedule for activities that interested her personally rather than advancing her career. She started attending yoga classes at a studio near her apartment, joined a book club that met at the local library, and began volunteering at a literacy program for adult learners. These new activities introduced Rebecca to people who knew her as simply Rebecca, rather than Rebecca Martinez, HR Director at Pinnacle Dynamics. The conversations were different, focused on personal interests, family stories, and shared experiences, rather than industry trends and career strategies. The relationships developed more slowly, but felt more authentic than the professional connections that had dominated her social life. At the literacy program, Rebecca worked with adults who were learning to read for the first time or improving their English skills. Many were immigrants working multiple jobs while caring for families, and their dedication to education, despite overwhelming challenges, reminded Rebecca of qualities she had lost sight of in her own life. Their gratitude for her volunteer assistance was genuine and immediate, providing a satisfaction that her professional achievements had rarely delivered. The book club introduced Rebecca to perspectives and experiences she had never encountered in her professional circles. The members came from diverse backgrounds and brought different life experiences to their discussions of the monthly selections. Rebecca found herself looking forward to their meetings with an anticipation she hadn't felt for social events in years. These activities were changing Rebecca's understanding of success and fulfillment in fundamental ways. The professional achievements that had defined her identity for so long began to feel less significant than the personal connections she was building through her volunteer work and social activities. The accident had disrupted her life in ways that initially felt negative, but were proving to be profoundly positive. Marcus was unaware of Rebecca's transformation or her ongoing search for him. His focus remained centered on Emma's needs and their daily routines, with occasional attention to expanding his freelance work and maintaining their financial stability. The rescue at Miller's Creek had become just another memory in a life filled with more pressing concerns and immediate responsibilities. Emma's health had been relatively stable through the winter months, allowing them to maintain their normal routines without the disruptions that flare-ups could cause. Her teachers reported that she was doing well academically and socially, participating in classroom activities with enthusiasm, despite occasionally needing to modify her involvement based on her energy levels. The stability was precious but never guaranteed. Marcus remained vigilant for changes in Emma's condition while trying not to let his vigilance overshadow her childhood experiences. The balance was delicate, providing necessary medical monitoring without making Emma feel like a patient rather than a child, maintaining normal family activities while accommodating health restrictions, planning for the future while focusing on daily needs. As spring approached, both Marcus and Rebecca continued their separate lives, unaware that their paths were about to converge in ways neither could anticipate. Rebecca's search had become more than just finding someone to thank. It had become a symbol of her desire to connect with authenticity and meaning in her life. Marcus's dedication to Emma and his quiet competence in building a stable life despite challenging circumstances embodied the qualities Rebecca was seeking but hadn't yet recognized. The stage was set for a meeting that would transform both their understanding of what they had been searching for. though neither realized they were searching for the same thing: genuine human connection that transcended professional success and social expectations. The accident that had brought them together briefly in crisis would soon bring them together again in circumstances that would test everything they thought they knew about themselves and what they valued most. The spring morning started like any other for Marcus Chen. Emma had woken up feeling strong, her energy levels good enough for a full day at school without modifications to her schedule. She chattered excitedly over breakfast about her science project on renewable energy, explaining to Marcus how solar panels converted sunlight into electricity while demonstrating with the small educational kit her teacher had provided for the assignment. Marcus dropped Emma off at school with the usual reminders about taking her midday medication and finding a quiet spot to rest if she felt tired. The routine was so established that Emma could recite his instructions along with him. But Marcus continued the ritual anyway, knowing that consistency helped both of them feel secure about her independence at school. At Danny's Electronics, the morning brought a steady stream of customers with typical problems: cracked phone screens, slow computers, and mysterious error messages that turned out to have simple solutions. Marcus worked efficiently through the repair queue, his hands moving automatically through familiar diagnostic procedures while his mind wandered to the freelance project he would tackle during his lunch break. The non-profit database system he had been developing was nearing completion, and the organization's director had expressed interest in having Marcus create a companion application for volunteer scheduling. The additional work would provide welcome income and the satisfaction of building something more complex than routine repairs, but it would also mean longer hours and less time with Emma in the evenings. Rebecca Martinez had adjusted her Tuesday search routine to accommodate a morning client meeting that had run longer than expected. Instead of her usual lunch break investigation, she found herself driving through the Millers Creek neighborhood. During her afternoon break, the worn sketch folded in her purse alongside a small stack of business cards in case she encountered someone who might remember seeing her rescuer. The electronics repair shop she approached had never been on her list before. Danny's Electronics sat between businesses she had already visited multiple times, and Rebecca realized she had somehow overlooked it during her systematic canvassing of the area. The modest storefront with its hand-painted sign and cluttered window display looked like exactly the kind of neighborhood business where someone might remember a local resident who had helped with an emergency. The bell above the door chimed as Rebecca entered, and she found herself in a cramped but organized space filled with the electronic detritus of modern life. Smartphones with shattered screens sat in neat rows awaiting repair. Computers were stacked on shelves with diagnostic tags attached, and cables of every description hung from pegboard displays along the walls. Behind the counter, a man with dark hair was bent over a disassembled laptop, using a small screwdriver to remove components. With practiced precision, he looked up when the bell sounded, and Rebecca felt a jolt of recognition that made her heart race. The face was familiar, older looking in daylight than it had seemed during those chaotic moments beside the creek, but unmistakably the same kind eyes and gentle expression she had been searching for. Marcus looked at the woman who had just entered his workplace and felt an odd sense of familiarity, though he couldn't immediately place where he might have seen her before. She was professionally dressed in a tailored blazer and dress pants, carrying herself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to corporate environments. Her dark hair was styled in a neat bob, and she wore minimal makeup that emphasized rather than concealed her natural features. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, setting down his screwdriver and giving her his full attention. "How can I help you today?" Rebecca struggled to find her voice, overwhelmed by the reality of finally finding the man she had been searching for. She had rehearsed this moment countless times during her drives through the neighborhood, but now that it was actually happening, her carefully planned words seemed inadequate. "I was hoping you could look at my laptop," she managed, falling back on the excuse she had used at other businesses. It's been running slowly lately. Marcus nodded and gestured for her to bring the device to the counter. As Rebecca opened her laptop bag, she studied his face more closely, confirming what her initial recognition had suggested. This was definitely the man who had pulled her from the car that night, though he showed no signs of recognizing her in return. The laptop Rebecca handed over was a high-end model that appeared to be in excellent condition. Marcus powered it on and ran through basic diagnostic procedures, checking startup times and running processes. Everything appeared to be functioning normally, but he had learned that customers sometimes brought in computers with intermittent problems that didn't manifest during brief testing. "Everything seems to be running fine," Marcus said after several minutes of examination. "When do you usually notice the slowness? Is it during startup, when running specific programs, or just general performance issues?" Rebecca realized she hadn't prepared for detailed questions about her fictional computer problem. "It's mostly when I'm running multiple applications at once," she improvised. "Sometimes it freezes completely." Marcus nodded and suggested a few optimization procedures that might help with multitasking performance. As he worked, Rebecca found herself studying his hands, the same hands that had unbuckled her seatbelt and carried her to safety. They moved with competent efficiency across the keyboard, and she noticed a small scar on his left knuckle that might have come from breaking her car window. "You know," Rebecca said carefully, "you look familiar. Have we met before?" Marcus glanced up from the laptop screen. "I don't think so. I'm pretty good with faces, and I don't remember meeting you. Maybe I just have one of those faces that reminds people of someone else." The response disappointed Rebecca, but she realized that her appearance now bore no resemblance to how she had looked during the accident. That night, she had been unconscious, covered in mud and blood, wearing clothes that were torn and soaked with creek water. Today, she was professionally groomed and alert, presenting an entirely different image. "I live in this neighborhood." Rebecca tried a different approach. "Maybe I've seen you around the area?" "Possibly," Marcus agreed. "My daughter and I live a few blocks from here, and we're usually walking to school or the park. Do you have children?" The question touched on Rebecca's sensitive area, but she managed to answer without revealing her emotional response. "No, I don't have children, but I admire parents who are dedicated to their kids. It must be challenging to balance work and family responsibilities." Marcus smiled with genuine warmth. "It definitely keeps life interesting. My daughter Emma is 7, and she's the reason I do everything I do." Being a parent changes your perspective on what's really important. Rebecca felt a pang of longing at the obvious love in Marcus's voice when he spoke about his daughter. She had convinced herself that she didn't want children, but listening to Marcus describe his devotion to Emma made her wonder if she had simply been protecting herself from disappointment. "She sounds wonderful," Rebecca said sincerely. "What does she like to do?" "Right now she's obsessed with science projects," Marcus replied, his eyes lighting up. "This week it's solar energy. Last month it was volcanoes. She wants to understand how everything works, which keeps me on my toes when it comes to answering her questions." As Marcus continued working on her laptop, Rebecca found herself genuinely interested in hearing about Emma's curiosities and accomplishments. Marcus spoke about his daughter with the kind of pride and affection that revealed his character more clearly than any formal introduction could have managed. The laptop repairs were completed quickly. Marcus had run optimization software and updated several drivers that might improve performance. The work was competent and thorough, but Rebecca realized that her computer had probably been functioning perfectly when she brought it in. "How much do I owe you?" Rebecca asked, reaching for her wallet. $35 for the diagnostic and optimization, Marcus replied. "But if you don't notice any improvement in performance over the next week, bring it back and I'll take another look at no charge." Rebecca handed him two $20 bills. "Keep the change. I appreciate the thorough work and the guarantee." Marcus looked surprised by the generous tip. "That's really not necessary, but thank you. I hope the performance improvements help." As Rebecca prepared to leave, she realized this might be her only opportunity to reveal her identity and express the gratitude that had driven her months-long search. But something held her back, perhaps the ordinariness of their interaction, or the sense that announcing herself as the accident victim might disrupt the natural flow of their conversation. "I hope your daughter's science project goes well," she said instead. "Maybe I'll see you around the neighborhood." "Maybe so," Marcus agreed, returning to his work on the disassembled laptop. "Thanks for choosing Danny's Electronics." Rebecca left the shop feeling both satisfied and frustrated. She had finally found her rescuer, confirmed that he was exactly the kind of person she had hoped he would be, but had failed to accomplish her primary goal of thanking him properly. The conversation had felt natural and pleasant, but incomplete. Walking back to her car, Rebecca realized that she now faced a new dilemma. She could return to the shop and reveal her identity, but that might seem strange after their normal customer interaction. She could become a regular customer, bringing in fabricated computer problems until an opportunity arose to tell him the truth. Or she could find another way to approach him outside of his workplace. The last option appealed to her most. Their conversation had revealed that Marcus lived nearby with his daughter Emma, and that they frequently walked through the neighborhood. Rebecca could adjust her schedule to spend more time in the area, hoping to encounter them during their daily routines. Such a meeting would feel more natural than another visit to the electronics shop. Marcus returned to his repair work, but found his concentration disrupted by thoughts of the woman who had just left. Something about her had seemed familiar, though he couldn't identify what had triggered that feeling. Her interest in Emma had seemed genuine rather than polite, and her questions about balancing work and family responsibilities suggested she understood the challenges involved. The generous tip had been unexpected but appreciated. Customers who paid well above the requested amount were rare, and Marcus always wondered about their motivations. Sometimes it was guilt over a simple problem they felt should have been able to solve themselves. Sometimes it was gratitude for patient explanations or quick service. Occasionally it seemed to be recognition of the economic realities facing small businesses and their employees. This customer had seemed different. Her tip felt less like charity and more like appreciation for professional service. Marcus had developed instincts about people's motivations during his months at the electronics shop, and this woman had struck him as someone who was successful enough that $40 was not a significant amount, but thoughtful enough to recognize that it was meaningful to him. Danny emerged from the back room where he had been working on a complex network installation for a local business. Was that the woman who's been asking around the neighborhood about someone? He asked Marcus. "I don't know," Marcus replied. "She brought in a laptop for optimization." Why would she be asking around about someone? Mrs. Chen from the laundromat mentioned that a professional-looking lady has been showing people a sketch of some guy she's trying to find, Danny explained. Something about wanting to thank him for helping during an emergency. Thought it might be the same person since she looked like she was dressed for business. Marcus felt a curious flutter of interest. Did Mrs. Chen say what kind of emergency? Car accident, I think. The lady apparently wants to find the guy who helped her. Danny shrugged. Could be anyone, I suppose, but it's not every day we get customers who tip that well for basic maintenance. The information created an odd resonance in Marcus's mind, but he couldn't quite connect it to anything specific. Car accidents were unfortunately common, and Good Samaritans who helped at emergency scenes were probably more numerous than people realized. Still, something about the timing and the woman's familiar appearance nagged at him. Emma's after-school program delivered her to the electronics shop at 3:30, as had become their routine when Marcus couldn't leave work early to pick her up at school. She bounced through the door with characteristic energy, her backpack loaded with books and the solar panel kit for her science project. "Daddy, Guess what happened in science class today? Emma announced, climbing onto the stool behind the key counter that Danny had designated as her homework station. Mrs. Peterson let us test our solar panels outside, and mine generated enough electricity to power a small LED light. Marcus smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. That's fantastic. And did you measure how much electricity it generated? Emma pulled out a notebook and showed Marcus the careful measurements she had recorded during the experiment. Her handwriting was still developing, but her attention to detail and scientific methodology impressed Marcus every time he saw her schoolwork. Mrs. Peterson said I might want to enter the school science fair, Emma continued. I could expand my project to test different types of solar panels and compare their efficiency rates. The science fair would require additional materials and more complex experimentation, both of which would cost money that Marcus would need to budget carefully. But Emma's interest in science and her aptitude for systematic investigation were too valuable to discourage over financial concerns. That sounds like a great idea, Marcus told her. We can research what materials you'd need and figure out how to put together a more advanced project. Emma beamed at his encouragement and immediately began sketching ideas for her expanded experiment in her notebook. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Marcus found himself genuinely excited about helping her explore the principles of renewable energy through hands-on experimentation. While Emma worked on her homework, Marcus reflected on the day's encounters. The mysterious woman with the familiar face, Danny's mention of someone searching for a car accident helper, Emma's excitement about her science project, all seemed to represent different aspects of his life that were more connected than he realized. Rebecca spent the remainder of her afternoon in a state of distracted excitement. She had found her rescuer, confirmed that he was working at a local electronics shop, and learned that he was a devoted single father raising a scientifically curious 7-year-old daughter. The information felt like pieces of a puzzle that was beginning to form a complete picture. Her planned approach of engineering casual neighborhood encounters suddenly seemed both more feasible and more complicated. She now knew where Marcus worked and approximately where he lived, but she also knew that he had a young daughter whose presence would affect any interaction they might have. Rebecca had limited experience with children, and the prospect of meeting Emma before revealing her connection to Marcus felt daunting. The drive back to Pinnacle Dynamics took Rebecca through the neighborhood where Marcus and Emma lived. She found herself slowing down to examine the sidewalks and parks where they might walk, imagining father and daughter conversations about science projects and daily adventures. The image was appealing in ways that surprised her with their intensity. At the office, Rebecca struggled to focus on her afternoon meetings and email responses. Her assistant Maria noticed the distraction and asked if she was feeling well, suggesting that Rebecca might still be experiencing effects from her concussion. Rebecca assured her that she was fine, but privately wondered if her obsession with finding Marcus had indeed affected her mental clarity. The truth was that Rebecca's priorities had shifted so fundamentally since the accident that her professional responsibilities felt less urgent than they once had. The hiring decisions, policy implementations, and strategic planning that had once energized her now seemed routine and uninspiring, compared to the personal quest that had consumed her attention for months. That evening, Rebecca found herself researching child development and elementary science education, trying to understand Emma's world well enough to interact naturally when the opportunity arose. She learned about typical 7-year-old interests, communication styles, and educational milestones, approaching the information with the same systematic thoroughness she brought to professional research. The research revealed that Emma's interest in science and her apparent academic success, despite health challenges, suggested exceptional resilience and intellectual curiosity. Rebecca began to understand why Marcus spoke about his daughter with such obvious pride. Emma represented hope and possibility in circumstances that could easily have been defined by limitation and struggle. Marcus spent his evening helping Emma planned her expanded solar energy project while simultaneously working on the nonprofit database system that was nearing completion. The balance between immediate parenting responsibilities and long-term financial planning required constant juggling, but Marcus had developed systems for managing multiple priorities without shortchanging either. Emma's project would require purchasing additional solar panels, measurement equipment, and materials for constructing testing apparatus. The costs were modest individually, but significant in aggregate for their tight budget. Marcus began researching suppliers and comparing prices, looking for ways to acquire what Emma needed without compromising other financial obligations. The database project was proving more complex than originally planned, but in ways that showcased Marcus's problem-solving abilities and technical expertise. The nonprofit's needs had evolved during development, requiring additional features and integration capabilities that pushed Marcus to expand his skills and create more sophisticated solutions. Working on challenging technical problems reminded Marcus of the intellectual satisfaction he had found in his previous corporate position. The electronics repair work provided steady income and community connection, but it didn't fully utilize his analytical capabilities or creative problem-solving instincts. The freelance projects were beginning to fill that gap while also improving their financial situation. As Emma fell asleep that night, she asked Marcus about the lady who had visited the shop that afternoon. Emma had a remarkable ability to remember customers and often asked about people who seemed interesting or unusual to her observant 7-year-old perspective. "She seemed nice," Emma said sleepily. "Did she have computer problems?" "Just needed some basic maintenance," Marcus replied. "Why did you think she seemed nice?" "She smiled when you talked about me," Emma explained. "Most customers don't really listen when you tell them about your family, but she did. That means she's probably a good person." Emma's assessment touched Marcus more than he expected. His daughter had developed sophisticated instincts about people's character, probably sharpened by her experiences navigating the medical system and depending on the kindness of strangers in various settings. Her approval of the mysterious customer felt significant, though Marcus couldn't explain why. Sleep came slowly for both Marcus and Rebecca that night, each processing the day's encounter from their different perspectives. Marcus wondered about the familiar woman who had seemed genuinely interested in his life, while Rebecca planned how to approach the man whose rescue had changed her understanding of what truly mattered. Neither could have predicted how quickly their carefully separate lives were about to become intertwined, or how Emma's innocent curiosity would play a crucial role in bringing together two people who had been searching for something they hadn't realized they needed. Rebecca's strategy of engineering casual encounters proved easier to plan than execute. Over the following weeks, she found herself driving through Marcus and Emma's neighborhood during times when they might be walking to school or the park, but their paths never crossed naturally. The few times she spotted them from a distance, they were engaged in animated conversations that she didn't want to interrupt with an obviously contrived meeting. Her solution came in the form of a legitimate technical problem. Rebecca's home computer, which she rarely used for anything more demanding than online shopping and email, began displaying strange error messages after a failed software update. Rather than calling her company's IT department or purchasing a new machine, she saw an opportunity to return to Danny's Electronics with a genuine repair need. Marcus was training a new part-time employee when Rebecca arrived with her malfunctioning desktop computer. The young man, barely out of high school, watched attentively as Marcus diagnosed the software corruption that was preventing the system from booting properly. Rebecca observed the interaction with interest, noting how patiently Marcus explained each step of the troubleshooting process and how he encouraged questions from his obviously nervous trainee. "This is a classic case of interrupted system files," Marcus explained to both his student and Rebecca. "The update process got corrupted, probably by a power fluctuation or network interruption. And now the operating system can't complete its STARTUP sequence. The repair would require several hours of work to reinstall the operating system and restore Rebecca's files from backup. Marcus suggested she could leave the computer and return the next day, but Rebecca asked if she could wait while the work was completed. She claimed to have flexible afternoon schedule and expressed interest in understanding the repair process. Marcus agreed, though he seemed slightly puzzled by her desire to observe technical work that most customers found tedious. Rebecca settled into a chair near the counter with a book she had brought, but found herself more interested in watching Marcus work and listening to his patient explanations to the trainee. Emma arrived from school during the middle of the repair process, greeting Marcus with her usual enthusiasm before noticing Rebecca sitting nearby. The 7-year-old studied their customer with the direct curiosity that children possess before adult social conventions teach them to be more circumspect. "Are you the lady with the slow computer?" Emma asked Rebecca, referring to their previous encounter. "No, this is a different computer problem," Rebecca replied, charmed by Emma's straightforward approach. "Your dad is fixing it because I accidentally broke something when I tried to update the software." Emma nodded sagely, as if software failures were familiar territory in her experience. "Daddy fixes everything. Yesterday, he helped me figure out why my solar panel wasn't working, and it turned out I had connected the wires backwards." "You're working with solar panels?" Rebecca asked, genuinely intrigued. "That sounds like advanced science for someone your age." Emma beamed at the recognition of her project's complexity. "I'm testing different types of solar cells to see which ones generate the most electricity. Do you want to see my experiment?" Before Rebecca could respond, Emma had retrieved her science project materials from her backpack and begun setting up a demonstration on the counter space beside where Marcus was working. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Rebecca found herself drawn into Emma's detailed explanation of photovoltaic principles and experimental methodology. Marcus glanced up from his repair work periodically to monitor Emma's impromptu science lesson. He had noticed Rebecca's genuine interest during their previous interaction, but her engagement with Emma's project seemed to go beyond polite customer service. Most adults either ignored children's enthusiastic explanations or offered superficial praise without really listening to the content. "Your hypothesis about panel angle affecting efficiency is really sophisticated," Rebecca told Emma after watching her demonstrate optimal positioning for maximum sunlight exposure. "Have you considered testing how different weather conditions might affect the results?" Emma's eyes widened with excitement at the suggestion. "I hadn't thought about that. I could test the panels on cloudy days and sunny days and rainy days and see if the electricity generation changes." "You'd need to control for other variables," Rebecca continued, surprised by her own engagement with the scientific discussion. "Like making sure you test at the same time of day and measure for the same duration each time." Marcus paused in his keyboard work to listen to the conversation. Rebecca's suggestions were technically sound and appropriately challenging for Emma's grade level, indicating either professional experience with education or natural aptitude for working with children. Either possibility impressed him and added another layer of intrigue to this customer, who seemed to appear whenever he was questioning his assumptions about people. Emma had filled a notebook with new experimental ideas by the time Marcus completed the computer repair. Her excitement about expanding her project was palpable, and she immediately began planning how to implement Rebecca's suggestions with the materials available within their budget constraints. "Miss Rebecca gave me so many good ideas for my science fair project," Emma announced to Marcus. "Can we buy a light meter to measure exactly how much sunlight the panels receive? And maybe we could test them during different times of day to see if morning sun works differently than afternoon sun?" Marcus smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm while mentally calculating the cost of additional equipment. The basic materials for Emma's original project had already stretched their discretionary spending. but her obvious passion for the work made him reluctant to limit her scientific exploration based purely on financial constraints. "We'll figure out how to make it work," Marcus assured her, a promise he had learned to keep through creative problem-solving and careful budgeting. "Maybe we can borrow some equipment from your teacher or find used instruments online." Rebecca listened to this exchange with growing understanding of the economic realities facing Marcus and Emma. The love and support Marcus provided his daughter were unlimited, but the resources available for enriching her educational experiences were clearly constrained by their financial situation. The realization made Rebecca want to help, though she wasn't sure how to offer assistance without seeming intrusive or patronizing. "The Phoenix Public Library has a science equipment lending program," Rebecca mentioned casually. "They loan out basic instruments for student projects, including light meters and digital multimeters." Marcus looked surprised. "I didn't know the library had equipment lending. That's a great resource for families." "They also have workshops on weekends where kids can work on science projects with volunteer mentors." Rebecca continued, drawing on research she had conducted about local educational resources. It might be a good way for Emma to get additional guidance on experimental design. Emma was immediately interested in the workshop possibility, and Marcus found himself taking notes about library programs he had never investigated. Rebecca's knowledge of community resources impressed him and suggested she was either well-connected in Phoenix or had reasons to research educational opportunities for children. The computer repair was completed successfully, with all of Rebecca's files restored and her system running more efficiently than before. Marcus explained what had caused the original problem and provided suggestions for preventing similar issues in the future. His technical explanations were clear and thorough without being condescending, and Rebecca appreciated his assumption that she was capable of understanding the concepts involved. "How much do I owe you?" Rebecca asked, reaching for her wallet while hoping to extend their interaction somehow. $65 for the diagnostic and system restoration, Marcus replied. "That includes transferring your files to an external backup drive, so you won't lose everything if this happens again." Rebecca handed him 4 $20 bills. "Keep the change. And thank you for letting me observe the repair process. I learned more about computers today than I have in years." Marcus accepted the generous payment with the same gracious surprise he had shown during her previous visit. "Thank you. I hope the system works reliably for you now." As Rebecca prepared to leave, Emma looked up from her science notebook with a sudden inspiration. "Miss Rebecca, would you like to come to my school science fair? It's next Friday at 7 o'clock, and I'll be presenting my solar panel project with all the new experiments you suggested." The invitation caught both Rebecca and Marcus off guard. Emma's social instincts were generally excellent, but inviting customers to school events was unprecedented behavior that left Marcus uncertain how to respond without embarrassing his daughter or their customer. Rebecca felt a surge of warmth at Emma's invitation, though she was aware that accepting might seem strange given her minimal relationship with the family. "I would love to see your presentation," she told Emma sincerely. "But I should probably check with your dad to make sure it's okay for me to attend." Marcus found himself in the awkward position of either refusing his daughter's generous invitation or encouraging a relationship with someone who was essentially a stranger, albeit an interesting and kind one. Emma's judgment about people was usually reliable, and Rebecca had demonstrated genuine interest in his daughter's education rather than mere politeness. "You're welcome to attend if you'd like," Marcus said, surprising himself with the invitation. Emma's put a lot of work into her project, and it would mean a lot to her to have additional support in the audience. Rebecca accepted immediately, exchanging contact information with Marcus so she could get details about the school location and parking arrangements. The prospect of seeing Emma present her research and spending more time with both father and daughter filled Rebecca with Anticipation that felt both exciting and slightly terrifying. After Rebecca left, Emma peppered Marcus with questions about their unusual customer. Why did she seem so interested in science projects? Did she have children of her own? Would she really come to the science fair, or was she just being polite? Marcus answered as best he could while acknowledging that he knew very little about Rebecca, beyond her apparent kindness and intelligence. "I think she's lonely," Emma observed with the intuitive wisdom that sometimes surprised Marcus with its accuracy. "She lights up when we talk to her, like she doesn't get to have interesting conversations very often." Emma's assessment resonated with Marcus, who had noticed something wistful in Rebecca's demeanor during both of her visits. She carried herself with professional confidence, but there was an underlying sadness or emptiness that became apparent during unguarded moments. Her interest in Emma's project and her knowledge of community resources suggested someone who cared about education and child development, but didn't have direct experience with them. Rebecca drove home from the electronics shop in a state of emotional confusion. The science fair invitation represented exactly the kind of natural opportunity she had been hoping for, but it also highlighted the deception inherent in her approach to building a relationship with Marcus and Emma. She was attending under false pretenses, knowing crucial information about their connection that they didn't possess. The ethical implications of her situation were becoming more complex as her feelings for both Marcus and Emma deepened. What had begun as a simple desire to thank someone for saving her life had evolved into genuine affection for a man and his daughter who embodied qualities she admired and longed to be part of her own life. Rebecca's professional background had taught her to value honesty and transparency in relationships, but she was discovering that emotional situations were more complicated than business dealings. The longer she delayed revealing her identity, the more difficult that revelation would become. But she was also reluctant to disrupt the natural development of their friendship with information that might change everything. The week leading up to Emma's science fair passed quickly for all three of them. Emma refined her experimental procedures and practiced her presentation until she could explain her findings with scientific precision and contagious enthusiasm. Marcus helped her create visual displays and charts that would clearly communicate her results to judges and audience members with varying levels of technical background. Rebecca found herself researching elementary science fair standards and typical judging criteria, wanting to be an informed audience member who could offer meaningful feedback on Emma's work. She also spent considerable time choosing appropriate attire for the event, settling on casual professional clothing that would fit in with other parents and community members without seeming overdressed or out of place. The science fair took place in the school gymnasium, which had been transformed into a maze of student project displays. Emma's exhibit was positioned near the center of the room, her colorful charts and working solar panel demonstration attracting attention from visitors and judges throughout the evening. Marcus stood proudly beside his daughter as she explained her methodology and results to anyone who stopped to listen. Rebecca arrived early and spent time touring other student projects before approaching Emma's display. The quality of work was impressive across all grade levels, but Emma's project stood out for its scientific rigor and the clarity of her presentation. When Rebecca finally reached their exhibit, Emma's face lit up with genuine pleasure at seeing her suggestion provider in the audience. "Miss Rebecca, you came!" Emma exclaimed, immediately launching into a detailed explanation of how she had implemented the weather testing and time of day variables they had discussed. "Look at these charts showing how much difference cloud cover makes in electricity generation. And this graph shows that morning sun is actually more efficient than afternoon sun because the panels don't get as hot." Rebecca listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated her understanding of the scientific principles involved. Other visitors gathered around Emma's display, drawn by the animated discussion and the obvious expertise of both the young presenter and her engaged audience member. Marcus watched the interaction with growing appreciation for Rebecca's ability to encourage Emma's confidence while challenging her thinking. When the formal judging concluded and families began packing up their displays, Emma was announced as the winner in her grade category. Her excitement was infectious, and Rebecca found herself cheering along with Marcus as Emma accepted her ribbon and certificate. The pride on Marcus's face was unmistakable, and Rebecca felt honored to share in this moment of triumph. "We should celebrate," Rebecca suggested impulsively as they loaded Emma's project materials into Marcus's car. "Would you like to get ice cream or something special for dinner?" Marcus hesitated, aware that accepting would represent a shift from casual acquaintance to something approaching friendship. But Emma's enthusiastic endorsement of the celebration idea and his own desire to extend the evening made the decision easy. They chose a family restaurant near the school where Emma could continue talking about her project, while enjoying a dinner that felt festive enough to mark her achievement. The conversation flowed naturally among all three of them, covering topics from renewable energy to space exploration to Emma's career aspirations as a scientist. Rebecca found herself completely charmed by Emma's intelligence and curiosity, and increasingly attracted to Marcus's patient parenting style and quiet competence. The evening felt like a preview of the kind of family experiences she had never thought she wanted, but now found herself craving with unexpected intensity. As they prepared to part ways in the restaurant parking lot, Emma surprised both adults with another spontaneous invitation. "Miss Rebecca, would you like to come to our apartment sometime and see my rock collection? Daddy helped me organize it by geological formation, and I have some really cool specimens." Marcus felt the familiar tension between his daughters. Generous social instincts and his responsibility to maintain appropriate boundaries with people they didn't know well. But the evening had convinced him that Rebecca was exactly the kind of positive influence he wanted in Emma's life, and his own growing interest in Rebecca made him hope she would accept. "I would love to see your rock collection," Rebecca replied, touched by Emma's continued openness and increasingly conflicted about her continued deception. "Maybe we can arrange something next weekend?" As they exchanged phone numbers and made tentative plans, Rebecca realized she was approaching a point where she would need to either reveal her true identity or risk destroying the trust that was building between them. The weight of her secret was becoming heavier as her feelings for Marcus and Emma grew stronger, but she was also terrified that the truth might end the relationship before it had really begun. Marcus drove home with Emma, chattering excitedly about her science fair victory and her plans for showing Rebecca her various collections and projects. His daughter's obvious attachment to their new friend pleased him, but he was also aware that he knew very little about Rebecca's background or motivations for spending time with them. The evening had revealed Rebecca to be intelligent, kind, and genuinely interested in Emma's education and development. She seemed to understand children and relate to them naturally, despite having mentioned that she didn't have kids of her own. Her knowledge of community resources and educational opportunities suggested either professional involvement with families or personal research into local programs. What Marcus couldn't shake was the persistent feeling that he had met Rebecca before their first encounter at the electronics shop. The sensation had grown stronger throughout the evening, triggered by familiar gestures and expressions that he couldn't place, but felt certain he had seen previously. The mystery nagged at him in ways he couldn't explain, adding an element of intrigue to his growing attraction to her. Neither Marcus nor Rebecca could have predicted that their carefully managed relationship was about to be disrupted by forces beyond their control, or that the truth about their connection would be revealed in circumstances that would test everything they thought they understood about trust, honesty, and the foundations of meaningful relationships. The weekend visit to see Emma's rock collection had been postponed twice due to Emma's minor health flare-up and Rebecca's work obligations, but they finally arranged to meet on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Rebecca arrived at Marcus and Emma's apartment building carrying a small gift, a professional grade magnifying glass she had researched for examining mineral specimens. Emma greeted her at the door with characteristic enthusiasm, immediately leading Rebecca to her bedroom where the rock collection was displayed on specially constructed shelves. Each specimen was labeled with scientific names and formation details that Emma recited from memory, demonstrating knowledge that impressed Rebecca with its depth and accuracy. Marcus observed their interaction from the doorway, noting how naturally Rebecca responded to Emma's scientific explanations and how easily she adapted her questions to Emma's comprehension level. The visit felt comfortable and familial in ways that surprised him with their intensity, as if Rebecca belonged in their small family unit. The afternoon progressed through various activities, examining rocks under the new magnifying glass, working on a jigsaw puzzle of the solar system, and preparing snacks in the small kitchen, where Emma demonstrated her knowledge of nutrition requirements for managing her autoimmune condition. Rebecca listened to Emma's matter-of-fact explanations about medications and dietary restrictions with the kind of attentive respect that Marcus rarely encountered from adults. As evening approached, Emma began showing signs of fatigue that Marcus recognized as requiring intervention. Her energy levels were still recovering from the previous week's flare-up, and the excitement of having company had probably pushed her beyond her optimal activity limits. "Em, I think it's time for your rest period," Marcus said gently, using the euphemism they had developed for mandatory quiet time that didn't sound medical or limiting. Emma protested briefly but accepted the necessity when Marcus explained that proper rest would help ensure she felt strong enough for planned activities the following week. Rebecca offered to leave so Emma could nap comfortably, but Emma insisted she should stay and talk with Marcus while she rested in her room. "You can see Daddy's computer setup," Emma suggested. "He builds really complicated programs on weekends. And maybe you'd like to see how they work." Marcus felt slightly embarrassed by Emma's enthusiastic promotion of his freelance work, but Rebecca expressed genuine interest in seeing his home office setup. The small second bedroom served multiple purposes: Emma's study area, Marcus's workspace, and storage for medical supplies, but Marcus had organized it efficiently to accommodate all functions. Rebecca was impressed by the sophistication of Marcus's development environment and the complexity of the projects displayed on his multiple monitors. The database system he was currently refining demonstrated programming skills that seemed far beyond what would be required for basic electronics repair work. "This is really advanced work," Rebecca commented, studying the code architecture and user interface design. "You're obviously overqualified for fixing broken phones and slow computers." Marcus shrugged with the resignation that had become familiar whenever his career situation was discussed. The job market for older developers isn't great, especially when you have scheduling constraints and employment gaps. Danny's Electronics provides steady income and flexibility for Emma's needs. "Have you considered consulting work or contract positions that might offer more flexibility than traditional employment?" Rebecca asked, though she was already mentally reviewing the current openings at Pinnacle Dynamics that might suit Marcus's qualifications. "I've applied to several consulting firms, but most want people who can travel or work extended hours on short notice," Marcus explained. Emma's medical appointments and school schedule make that impossible, and single parents aren't exactly what clients have in mind when they think of dedicated consultants. Rebecca felt a surge of anger at the systematic biases that were preventing Marcus from utilizing his obvious talents. His technical skills were excellent. His work ethic was demonstrated by his ability to balance multiple responsibilities, and his problem-solving abilities were evident in everything from Emma's science projects to the efficient organization of their small apartment. "That's incredibly short-sighted," Rebecca said with more vehemence than she had intended. "Some of the best employees I've worked with have been parents who understand time management and priority setting better than people without family responsibilities." Marcus looked surprised by her passionate response. "You sound like you have experience with hiring decisions." Do you work in human resources or management? The question caught Rebecca off guard, forcing her to confront the deception she had been maintaining throughout their developing relationship. She worked in human resources at one of Phoenix's most prominent tech companies, had probably reviewed applications from dozens of people in situations similar to Marcus's, and had implemented exactly the kind of systematic biases that were keeping him underemployed. I work for a technology company, Rebecca said carefully, trying to navigate between honesty and continued concealment. I've seen how hiring decisions are made, and it's frustrating when good people are overlooked because of circumstances beyond their control. Before Marcus could ask follow-up questions, Emma called from her bedroom asking for her evening medication. Marcus excused himself to help with the injection routine, leaving Rebecca alone with his computer setup and her growing guilt about the layers of deception in their relationship. While Marcus was occupied with Emma's care, Rebecca's phone rang with an urgent call from Pinnacle Dynamics. A critical system failure was affecting multiple client projects, and the IT department needed authorization to implement emergency protocols that fell under her administrative purview. The conversation required Rebecca to make technical decisions and coordinate with department heads using her official title and authority. Marcus returned from Emma's room just as Rebecca was concluding the call with instructions about overtime authorization and emergency consulting contracts. Her professional demeanor during the conversation was completely different from the casual friendliness she had displayed throughout their personal interactions, and Marcus couldn't help overhearing enough to understand that she held significant corporate responsibility. "I'm sorry about that," Rebecca said, ending the call and trying to return to their previous conversation. "Work emergencies don't respect weekend schedules. It sounded like you were making decisions about consulting contracts and overtime." "Authorization," Marcus observed. "That's pretty high-level responsibility for a general technology company employee." Rebecca realized that her phone conversation had revealed more about her professional status than she had intended to disclose. The careful ambiguity she had maintained about her job was no longer sustainable, but she wasn't prepared to reveal the full extent of her deception. "I'm in management," she admitted reluctantly. "Sometimes that means handling emergencies, even when you're trying to have a personal life." Emma emerged from her bedroom, having rested enough to rejoin their conversation. She immediately noticed the tension between the adults and asked with characteristic directness whether they were having an argument about something. "We're just talking about work stuff," Marcus assured her. "Nothing important." But Emma's intuitive sensitivity to emotional undercurrents made her persistent in trying to understand what had changed during her absence. "Miss Rebecca looks sad," she observed. "Did something bad happen at her job?" Rebecca felt overwhelmed by Emma's perceptive concern and her own mounting guilt about maintaining lies with people who had welcomed her into their lives with such openness and trust. The weight of her deception was becoming unbearable, but she was terrified that revealing the truth would destroy the relationship she had come to value above anything else in her life. "I should probably go," Rebecca said, gathering her purse and jacket with sudden urgency. "It's getting late, and you both have had a long day." Emma protested the abrupt departure, insisting that Rebecca should stay for dinner and continue their conversations about science and space exploration. But Rebecca was too emotionally overwhelmed to maintain her composure much longer, and she needed time to figure out how to navigate the increasingly complex situation she had created. Marcus walked Rebecca to her car, noting her obvious distress, but uncertain whether to press for explanations or respect her apparent need for privacy. Their relationship was still new enough that he wasn't sure how much emotional intimacy was appropriate or welcome. "Thank you for spending time with Emma today," Marcus said as Rebecca unlocked her BMW. "She really enjoys your company, and it means a lot to have someone who takes her interests seriously." "She's an amazing kid," Rebecca replied sincerely. "You're doing an incredible job raising her, especially given all the challenges you're managing." As Rebecca drove away, Marcus stood in the parking lot, wondering what had triggered her sudden emotional withdrawal. The phone conversation had seemed to upset her, but he couldn't understand why work stress would affect her so dramatically during what had been an enjoyable, personal visit. Emma appeared at the apartment window, waving goodbye to Rebecca and asking Marcus when their friend would visit again. Her attachment to Rebecca was obvious and concerning, given how little they actually knew about the woman who had become such a significant presence in their lives. Rebecca spent the drive home wrestling with the realization that her deception had become untenable. She was falling in love with Marcus and genuinely cared about Emma, but the foundation of their relationship was built on lies that would become more destructive the longer they were maintained. The irony of her situation was overwhelming. She had spent months searching for Marcus to thank him for saving her life, but now that she had found him and developed real feelings for him, she was terrified that revealing the truth would cost her the relationship she treasured most. That evening, Rebecca sat in her apartment trying to compose a letter that would explain everything: the accident, her search, her identity as the HR director who had rejected his applications, and her feelings for both him and Emma. But every attempt to put her confession into words seemed inadequate to convey the complexity of her emotions and the sincerity of her regret about the deception. Meanwhile, Marcus helped Emma prepare for bed while answering her persistent questions about Rebecca's sudden departure. Emma's concern for their friend was touching, but also highlighted how much they both had invested emotionally in someone who remained essentially a mystery to them. "Do you think Miss Rebecca will come back?" Emma asked as Marcus tucked her into bed. "I hope so," Marcus replied honestly. "But sometimes adults have complicated situations that make friendships difficult to maintain." Emma considered this explanation with the seriousness she brought to complex problems. "Maybe we could help her with whatever is making her sad," she suggested. "That's what friends do for each other." Marcus smiled at his daughter's generous instincts, even as he worried about her growing attachment to someone whose place in their lives was uncertain. Emma had experienced enough loss and disappointment in her young life, and Marcus was determined to protect her from additional emotional pain if possible. The following Monday brought crisis to both Marcus and Rebecca's lives, though from different directions. Emma woke up with symptoms that indicated a significant flare-up of her autoimmune condition, requiring immediate medical attention and potentially hospitalization if her condition didn't stabilize quickly. Marcus called into work and rushed Emma to their pediatrician, who confirmed that her inflammatory markers were elevated beyond the range that could be managed with outpatient treatment. The hospital admission process was familiar but always frightening, involving 4 medications, continuous monitoring, and the possibility that adjustments to her treatment protocol might be necessary. At Pinnacle Dynamics, Rebecca received an urgent message from her assistant about a discrimination complaint that had been filed against the company's hiring practices. An employment attorney representing several rejected applicants was alleging systematic age bias in the recruiting process, specifically targeting Rebecca's department for their rejection patterns. The complaint included detailed analysis of hiring data, showing that applicants over 40 were rejected at significantly higher rates than younger candidates with similar qualifications, regardless of their experience or skill levels. Rebecca's filtering algorithms and screening procedures were specifically cited as evidence of discriminatory practices. Among the plaintiffs listed in the complaint was Marcus Chen, whose multiple applications and rejections fit the pattern of age discrimination. The attorney was attempting to establish. Rebecca stared at Marcus's name on the legal document with growing horror, realizing that her professional decisions had directly harmed the man she had come to love. The complaint requested access to all hiring records, email communications about rejected applicants, and policy documents that guided screening procedures. Rebecca knew that her documented rationales for rejecting older candidates would provide clear evidence of the biases that had influenced her decisions. As Marcus sat beside Emma's hospital bed, monitoring her response to 4 steroids and trying to manage his own anxiety about her condition, his phone rang with a call from the employment attorney handling the discrimination case. The lawyer explained about the class action suit and asked whether Marcus would be willing to provide additional documentation about his job search experiences. Marcus agreed to cooperate with the investigation, though his primary concern remained Emma's health rather than his own employment struggles. The timing felt particularly cruel. Dealing with legal issues while his daughter was hospitalized seemed like an unnecessary complication to an already overwhelming situation. Rebecca spent the day in emergency meetings with Pinnacle's legal team, trying to develop responses to the discrimination allegations, while knowing that she was personally responsible for many of the questioned decisions. Her career was in jeopardy, but her greater concern was the realization that she had contributed to Marcus's financial struggles while simultaneously developing feelings for him under false pretenses. The convergence of these crises created a perfect storm that would force both Marcus and Rebecca to confront truths they had been avoiding. Rebecca's deception would be exposed through legal proceedings rather than personal confession, and Marcus would discover that the woman he was beginning to love was the same person whose professional decisions had made his life significantly more difficult. The stage was set for revelations that would test everything they thought they understood about forgiveness, second chances, and the possibility of building genuine relationships on foundations of honesty rather than convenience. The hospital corridors had become Marcus's second home over the past 3 days, as Emma's condition slowly stabilized under aggressive treatment. Her inflammatory markers were finally decreasing, and the medical team was cautiously optimistic that she would be able to return home by the weekend. Marcus had barely left her bedside, sleeping in the uncomfortable reclining chair and surviving on vending machine coffee and whatever meals the hospital cafeteria could provide. During one of Emma's nap periods, Marcus stepped into the hallway to take a call from the employment attorney representing the discrimination case. The lawyer, David Rodriguez, had been working around the clock to build their case and had uncovered additional evidence that strengthened their position significantly. "Marcus, I need to tell you something that might be difficult to hear," David said without preamble. "We've identified the specific person at Pinnacle Dynamics who was responsible for rejecting your applications. Her name is Rebecca Martinez, and she's the HR director who implemented the screening algorithms that filtered out older candidates." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Rebecca Martinez, the woman who had been spending time with his daughter, who had shown genuine interest in Emma's education, who had made him feel hopeful about the possibility of meaningful adult companionship. For the first time since his divorce, the woman he had been falling in love with was the same person whose professional decisions had contributed to their financial struggles and limited Emma's access to better medical care. "Are you absolutely certain?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from the sick feeling spreading through his chest. "Completely certain. We have her email communications discussing your application specifically. She noted your age and employment gap as primary reasons for rejection, despite your technical qualifications being exactly what they were looking for." "I'm sorry, Marcus. I know this must be a shock." Marcus ended the call and stood in the hospital hallway trying to process the magnitude of Rebecca's deception. Every interaction they had shared took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of her knowledge about their connection, her interest in Emma's education, her questions about his career struggles, her apparent concern about hiring discrimination in the tech industry. All of it had been performed while she knew exactly who he was and what she had done to limit his opportunities. The betrayal felt deeper than professional disappointment. Rebecca had witnessed his love for Emma, had seen the modest apartment and careful budgeting that resulted from his limited income, had listened to his concerns about providing adequate medical care for his daughter, all while knowing that her own decisions had contributed to their circumstances. Emma stirred in her hospital bed and asked for water with the groggy voice of someone whose sleep had been interrupted by medication schedules and nursing checks. Marcus helped her sit up and drink from the straw cup, trying to hide his emotional turmoil behind the calm demeanor she needed from him during her recovery. "Daddy, you look upset," Emma observed with the perceptive awareness that her medical experiences had sharpened. "Is something wrong with my test results?" "No, sweetheart. Your tests are showing improvement," Marcus assured her. "I just got some disappointing news about a work situation, but it has nothing to do with your health." Emma nodded but continued studying his face with concern. "Is it about Miss Rebecca? She seemed sad when she left our apartment, and now you look sad too. Maybe there's something we can do to help her feel better." Marcus felt his heart break a little more at his daughter's continued concern for the woman who had deceived them. Both. Emma's capacity for empathy and forgiveness was one of her most beautiful qualities, but Marcus wasn't sure he possessed the same ability to look past Rebecca's choices. Meanwhile, Rebecca was facing her own crisis as Pinnacle Dynamics' legal team prepared their defense against the discrimination charges. The company's attorneys had made it clear that Rebecca's position was untenable. Her documented decision-making patterns provided clear evidence of the biases that had influenced hiring practices, and her continued employment would be a liability in any settlement negotiations. Rebecca had spent the past 2 days drafting her resignation letter, while simultaneously trying to find the courage to contact Marcus and explain everything before he learned the truth through legal proceedings. She had driven to the hospital twice, knowing from social media posts by mutual acquaintances that Emma was receiving treatment there, but had been unable to force herself to walk through the entrance and face the consequences of her deception. The irony was crushing. Rebecca had spent months searching for Marcus to thank him for saving her life, but now that she had found him and fallen in love with both him and Emma, her professional actions had made her the villain in their story, rather than the grateful beneficiary of his heroism. Rebecca's phone rang with a call from David Rodriguez, the attorney handling the discrimination case. She had been expecting contact from the plaintiff's legal team, but she wasn't prepared for the attorney's opening statement. "Ms. Martinez, I'm calling to inform you that one of our plaintiffs, Marcus Chen, has specifically requested the opportunity to speak with you directly before we proceed with formal depositions. Normally I would advise against such contact, but he's been quite insistent, and he's mentioned that you have a personal relationship outside of the employment situation." Rebecca's hands shook as she absorbed the implications. Marcus knew. He had discovered her identity and wanted to confront her directly rather than leaving everything to lawyers and legal proceedings. The prospect terrified her, but she also felt relief that the deception was finally over, and she could attempt to explain her actions and motivations. "I'll meet with him," Rebecca said quietly. "When and where would be appropriate?" He suggested the hospital cafeteria this evening at 8 o'clock, after his daughter's visiting hours conclude. He wants to keep this conversation separate from his child's medical situation. Rebecca agreed to the meeting while trying to prepare mentally for what would likely be the most difficult conversation of her life. She spent the afternoon writing notes about everything she wanted to say: her search for him after the accident, her growing feelings for both him and Emma, her regret about the hiring decisions that had affected his family, and her desperate hope that somehow they might find a way forward despite the damage her choices had caused. The hospital cafeteria, 8 o'clock, was nearly empty, with just a few staff members grabbing late dinners between shifts and family members of long-term patients seeking refuge from the emotional intensity of medical settings. Rebecca arrived early and chose a corner table where they could speak privately without being overheard by other visitors. Marcus appeared at exactly 8 o'clock, looking exhausted from days of hospital vigil, but determined to have the conversation that would resolve the uncertainty surrounding their relationship. He spotted Rebecca immediately and walked over to join her at the small table, his expression unreadable, but not hostile. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Marcus said, sitting down across from her. "I think we both know this conversation is overdue." Rebecca nodded, struggling to find words that could begin to address the complexity of their situation. "Marcus, I need you to know that everything I felt for you and Emma was genuine, regardless of how this relationship began. My feelings weren't part of some elaborate deception. But you knew who I was from the first day I walked into your office," Marcus replied. "You recognized me from the accident, and you knew that you had rejected my job applications. Every conversation we had about my career struggles, every moment you spent with Emma knowing how much better medical care she could receive if I had stable employment with good benefits, you knew exactly what your decisions had cost us." The accusation was delivered without anger, which somehow made it more devastating than if Marcus had shouted or expressed rage. His disappointment was quiet and profound, reflecting the depth of trust that had been violated by her deception. "You're right about everything," Rebecca admitted. "I recognized you that first day at the electronics shop, and I knew immediately that I was the reason you weren't working in your field. But I also need you to understand that meeting you and Emma changed everything about how I see my professional responsibilities and my personal priorities." Rebecca explained about the accident and her months-long search for her rescuer, about how finding Marcus had made her question every assumption she had held about success and fulfillment. She described the transformation in her thinking about hiring practices, her growing awareness of the human impact of corporate decisions, and her realization that the systematic biases she had implemented were causing real harm to good people. "I know this doesn't excuse what I did," Rebecca continued, "but I need you to know that you and Emma didn't just change my feelings, you changed who I am as a person. The woman who rejected your applications wouldn't have recognized the value of what you've built with Emma, wouldn't have understood that being a devoted parent makes someone more reliable and committed, not less." Marcus listened without interrupting, though Rebecca could see him processing every word and weighing her explanations against his own experience of their relationship. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that remained unresolved. "I resigned from Pinnacle Dynamics this afternoon," Rebecca said finally. "I couldn't continue working for a company where my decisions had hurt people like you, and I couldn't participate in defending practices that I now understand are fundamentally wrong." "What will you do now?" Marcus asked, the first question. That suggested he might be considering her situation from a perspective beyond his own hurt and disappointment. "I don't know yet," Rebecca admitted. "I have savings that will last for a while, and I've been thinking about using my experience to help companies develop more equitable hiring practices. But honestly, my immediate concern is whether there's any way to repair the damage I've done to our relationship." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands folded on the table. When he looked up, Rebecca was surprised to see something other than anger or disappointment in his expression. There was sadness, but also a kind of weary understanding. "The thing that makes this so complicated," Marcus said slowly, "is that I can see how much you care about Emma and how much she cares about you. Her first question when she wakes up is whether you've come to visit, and she keeps asking when you'll be able to see her rock collection again. She doesn't understand why adults have to make relationships so complicated." Rebecca felt tears threatening at the mention of Emma's continued affection. "I love her like she was my own daughter," she said quietly, "and I love you in ways I never thought I was capable of feeling. That's what makes this so terrible. I found everything I didn't know I was looking for, but I found it through deception that hurt the people I care about most. The attorney says that your cooperation with the discrimination case could help a lot of people who've been affected by similar hiring practices," Marcus said. "Companies pay attention when high-level executives acknowledge that their policies were wrong and work to change them." Rebecca nodded. "I've already agreed to provide whatever testimony and documentation they need." It's the least I can do to try to prevent other families from going through what you've experienced." They sat in silence again, both processing the conversation and trying to understand what possibilities might exist for moving forward. The betrayal was real and significant, but so were the feelings that had developed between them and Emma's obvious attachment to Rebecca. "I need time to think about all of this," Marcus said eventually. "Emma's health has to be my primary concern right now, and I can't make decisions about our personal relationship while she's still recovering." Rebecca accepted this with grateful relief that he was willing to consider any future for their relationship. "I understand completely. Take whatever time you need. I'll wait as long as necessary. There's one thing I need you to know," Marcus added as they prepared to leave. "That night at Miller's Creek, when I pulled you out of the car, I didn't hesitate because I knew who you were or what you might be able to do for me. I helped because that's what you do when someone needs help. The fact that you turned out to be someone whose decisions had affected my life doesn't change the fact that saving you was the right thing to do." Rebecca felt overwhelmed by the generosity of his statement. Even in the midst of his own hurt and disappointment, Marcus was able to separate her professional actions from the human connection that had brought them together. His capacity for fairness and perspective reminded her why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. "Thank you for that," Rebecca said. "And thank you for giving me the chance to explain, even though I don't deserve your consideration. After what I've done." They parted in the hospital parking lot with an awkward handshake that felt inadequate for the complexity of their relationship, but appropriate for the uncertainty of their future. Rebecca drove home feeling emotionally drained but also relieved that the truth was finally out and that Marcus hadn't immediately dismissed any possibility of reconciliation. Over the following weeks, as Emma recovered at home and gradually returned to her normal activities, Marcus found himself thinking constantly about Rebecca's explanations and his own feelings about forgiveness and second chances. Emma's frequent questions about when their friend would visit again forced him to examine whether his anger about Rebecca's deception was more important than the happiness she had brought to both their lives. The discrimination lawsuit proceeded with Rebecca's full cooperation, resulting in a significant settlement that provided compensation for affected applicants and required Pinnacle Dynamics to completely overhaul their hiring practices. Rebecca's testimony was instrumental in establishing the pattern of bias that had excluded qualified candidates, and her willingness to accept responsibility for her decisions impressed both the legal teams and the affected plaintiffs. Marcus used his portion of the settlement to establish a medical fund for Emma's ongoing care and to enroll in advanced programming courses that would update his skills for the current job market. But the financial relief, while significant, didn't resolve his emotional confusion about Rebecca's place in their lives. The breakthrough came through Emma herself, who had been listening to Marcus's phone calls with the attorney and had gradually pieced together the connection between Rebecca's job and their family's financial struggles. With the straightforward logic that children often bring to complex adult situations, Emma asked the question that cut through all of Marcus's intellectual analysis. "Daddy, if Miss Rebecca was wrong about not hiring you, but she's trying to fix it now by helping other people, and she loves us and we love her, why can't we forgive her like you taught me to forgive people who make mistakes?" The question forced Marcus to confront the contradiction between the values he was teaching his daughter and his own reluctance to extend forgiveness to someone who had acknowledged her mistakes and was working to correct them. Emma's wisdom reminded him that holding on to anger ultimately hurt him more than the person who had wronged him. Marcus called Rebecca that evening, the first direct contact they had shared since their hospital cafeteria conversation 3 weeks earlier. She answered immediately, as if she had been waiting by her phone for any word from him. "Rebecca, it's Marcus. I was wondering if you'd like to come to dinner this weekend. Emma has been asking about you constantly, and I think it's time we talked about how to move forward." Rebecca's relief was audible through the phone. I would love that more than anything. Are you sure you're ready for this conversation? I'm sure that Emma is right about forgiveness being more important than holding grudges, Marcus replied. And I'm sure that she misses you and that I miss you too, despite everything that's happened. The dinner was initially awkward as all. Three of them navigated the changed dynamics of their relationship. Emma's delight at seeing Rebecca again was infectious, but Marcus and Rebecca were both cautious about presuming too much about their future possibilities. Over the course of the evening, they began the slow process of rebuilding trust through honest communication about their expectations, their fears, and their hopes for what their relationship might become. Rebecca acknowledged that earning back Marcus's trust would require time and consistent demonstration of her changed values. Marcus admitted that his feelings for Rebecca had never disappeared, despite his anger about her deception. Emma, with the wisdom that sometimes comes from facing mortality at a young age, told them both that life was too short to waste time being angry when they could be happy together instead. Her perspective provided the foundation for the careful reconstruction of their relationship on a basis of honesty rather than the secrets that had complicated their beginning. 6 months later, Rebecca had established herself as an independent consultant, helping companies develop inclusive hiring practices, drawing on her experience from both sides of the discrimination issue. Her work was personally fulfilling in ways that her corporate position had never been, and it allowed her the flexibility to be more involved in Emma's education and medical care. Marcus had accepted a senior developer position at a progressive tech startup that valued his experience and offered the kind of benefits package that ensured Emma's medical needs would be fully covered. The company's flexible work arrangements allowed him to maintain his commitment to being present for Emma's important moments while pursuing challenging professional projects. Emma's health had stabilized significantly with access to newer treatments that their improved insurance coverage made possible. Her science projects had become increasingly sophisticated, and she was already talking about wanting to study renewable energy engineering in college. Her resilience and curiosity continued to amaze both Marcus and Rebecca, who had become equal partners in supporting her dreams and managing her medical needs. The three of them had settled into a routine that felt like family in all the ways that mattered. Rebecca had moved to an apartment in their neighborhood, close enough for daily involvement in their lives but separate enough to respect the gradual pace of their relationship development. Emma had her own key to Rebecca's apartment and considered it an extension of her home territory. Their relationship had been built slowly and carefully on a foundation of complete honesty about their individual histories, their concerns about the future, and their commitment to Emma's well-being above all other considerations. The trust between Marcus and Rebecca was deeper and more resilient because it had been tested and consciously rebuilt rather than simply assumed. On the anniversary of the accident at Miller's Creek, the three of them visited the site together. Emma had insisted on bringing flowers to mark the place where, as she put it, Daddy saved Miss Rebecca and Miss Rebecca found our family. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. The accident that had brought them together had also taught them about the importance of second chances and the possibility of finding love in unexpected circumstances. Marcus still occasionally marveled at the series of coincidences and choices that had led to their current happiness. Rebecca's search for her rescuer, her gradual integration into their lives, the discrimination lawsuit that had forced the truth into the open, Emma's wise insistence on forgiveness, all of it had combined to create something better than any of them could have planned or imagined individually. Rebecca often reflected on how completely her definition of success had changed since the accident. The professional achievements that had once defined her identity seemed less important than the daily satisfaction of being part of Emma's education, supporting Marcus's career development, and building a family based on mutual care and respect rather than traditional structures. Emma, now 8 and thriving in ways that exceeded her doctor's most optimistic projections, continued to approach life with the curiosity and generosity that had first attracted Rebecca to their family. Her science fair projects had evolved to include research on inclusive hiring practices in STEM fields, inspired by the stories she had heard about barriers facing qualified candidates and the importance of giving everyone fair opportunities. The love that had grown between the three of them was stronger for having survived the test of truth and forgiveness. Marcus and Rebecca had learned that lasting relationships required not just compatibility and affection, but also the courage to be honest about past mistakes and the commitment to building something better together. Their story had become one of redemption and second chances, proving that sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most unexpected circumstances, and that love can grow from the seeds of crisis when it's nurtured with honesty, patience, and the wisdom to recognize what truly matters in life. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.